This episode was made possible by ExpressVPN. Start browsing the web securely with 3 months free by going to expressvpn.com/MMI. On this episode of Meet My Inspiration, I speak with David Breakspear. David's story is both heartbreaking and inspiring. From the age of 10, he spent nearly 40 years in and out of the criminal justice system in the UK. He has had a rough life with long stretches in prison, periods of homelessness, and drug addiction. But against all odds, at nearly 50 years of age, he managed to turn his life around. He now uses his voice and experiences to both reach out to at-risk youth and to inspire change and reform in the criminal justice and education systems. And now, please welcome David Breakspear. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Minion, and this is Meet My Inspiration. My guest today is David Breakspear. David, thank you very much for joining me today on Meet My Inspiration.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. To start, David, can you give us an overview of your background and the work that you're doing now?
I was, if you like, caught within the criminal justice system, the revolving door of the criminal justice system. From the age of 10 years old, I first got in trouble with the police as a 10-year-old boy. And it wasn't until a few years ago, 5 years ago, that I realised it was time to grow up. It was time to change for me, and also change me for other people as well, as in my children and family and loved ones. It wasn't a great life that I was living. And now I've packaged up everything from my past, the negatives and the positives, both from society, living in society, and also living within the criminal justice system in prisons. And I've tried to put all of that together, because 40 years virtually is a lot of experiences or life experiences to be able to put together. Yet, fair enough, it's on this side of the fence, which through those years was the wrong side of the fence, but it enabled me to then see our criminal justice system from not a unique perspective, but from a perspective that not many have. And in order to, if you like, use my experiences to try and influence the way that other people think, not tell people what to think, but just to try and influence and try and get people to look at our prison system in a different way.
Fantastic. Well, it's a big story. There's a lot to discuss here. I think probably the best way to begin is to maybe go back in time to when you were a kid. So where exactly did you grow up, and how would you describe your upbringing?
I grew up in the southeast of England. My upbringing wasn't fantastic, but it wasn't bad. I have no complaints with the family unit whatsoever. My mum and dad, in my opinion, were fine. I was born in 1969, so the 70s and the 80s were pretty fast-moving decades. Unfortunately for me, I was the youngest of six. I say unfortunately for me, but I was the youngest of six. And I followed my brothers and sisters through the education system. So just the fact of being the youngest of six, I found that there was a lot of comparing going on. I wasn't like such and such. I wasn't like such and such. That's when my name was called right. But again, that's what happens within big families. And in a way, it kind of spilled out into my education life. And as much as I didn't take anything out on the family as such, I did take it out on the education system when the same thing started to happen. If you like, the behavior. I at the age of 8, I suffered a period of sexual abuse. It wasn't anybody that was known to the family. It was a local toy shop owner. It happened to myself and a friend of mine. That was something I didn't deal with until later on in life. But in them days, there wasn't really anything. There was nothing available really, and there was no talk of, there's nothing on the TV about it. There was no awareness of sexual abuse, child sexual abuse back then, although it was quite, as we've seen these days, looking back, quite prevalent. And then a couple of years after that, I contracted meningitis. and was quite ill through that. And it wasn't long after that that I received my first criminal record. Now, I'm not suggesting that every child that has trauma ends up in prison, but there is enough statistics to show that it is a pathway into
Absolutely.
into prison, the school to prison pipeline, if you like. So really, my family life was my family life. I mean, I was in a big family. Competition goes on with the family. We shared everything. I mean, I even shared my brothers and sisters' clothes. So everything really was, I was a part of everybody else rather than being a whole. And I rebelled against that. And then when I went to secondary school, the secondary school that I'd gone to, high school, I assume in America, was where a couple of family members that were slightly different to everyone else. They were ones that broke the law. They were ones that were fighting. And at that school, after I got my feet under the table and I started acting up there, and I was being told, I'm just like. So I eventually had an image, if you like. I had an identity that I could adhere to. And that's how I reacted. I'd become violent at school. I eventually was expelled at the age of 14. And once, in them days, we had, it was known as a retreat centre, and there I only lasted 2 weeks. I was kicked out of there. So basically I was removed from the education system itself.
Well, let's slow down for a second, David. I mean, there is a lot of there's a lot of negativity to your life, unfortunately, but I don't think it was all entirely negative. It couldn't have been. I want to know, when you were a kid, during those relatively early years before you were getting involved in crime, I mean, I guess at the age of 10, is there somebody that you looked up to? Is there a person that you admired, somebody in your life, or even somebody on television, or an author, or anybody? Who did you look up to? Who did you admire in your younger years?
This is going to sound so bad, but there actually was, and it was when I was 10, and it was when I was really searching for an identity. And back then, of course, Google was a trip to the library. And I was quite fortunate because my grandmother, she used to live literally 50 yards away from our local library. So it was something, I mean, although I just want to make a point here that although I was kicked out of the education system, it was due to my behaviour. My intelligence was never in question, and that's something we can come back to. But so when I can't remember if it was on the news or in a newspaper that I had read about this guy called Charlie Richardson, who belonged to a gang that the media dubbed the Torture Gang, and he had escaped from prison, but he hadn't escaped. Remember, I'm 10 years old, so prison is this really scary place that you don't want to end up. And here's this guy. There's me, if you like, I suppose, upon searching for an identity, was also looking for something to grasp onto. I don't know. I can't really answer it. I mean, looking back, I don't have the answers. And as a 10-year-old, there was no way I would have the answers. And he had walked out of prison. The prison was an open prison. And I wasn't aware of there was prison. That was it. I didn't know there was a high security prison. I didn't know there was an open prison. For me, it was just this guy walks out of prison. So I began to research him, and it was as if he tried to get himself involved with the establishment, and rather than all right, he was basically ran the Richardson family in South London, which included his brother Eddie and a guy that most people probably would have heard of, which is Mad Frankie Fraser, around about the same time as the Craze. So you can imagine that he had a story to tell. And when I looked into it more, and as I say, it was like, it was him against the establishment rather than this guy that was being sentenced by the courts. He kind of gate crashed, the establishment, if you like, and they didn't like that. He was accused of breaking into Harold Wilson's office when Harold Wilson was Prime Minister and stealing some evidence that he could be blackmailed with. So, I mean, there was a lot that went on. And for me, it was like, it's like, you don't have to be a part of something. You can kind of do it on your own. You can, and in a way that's how I see it now, not obviously then. So he becomes someone that become a kind of role model, I suppose. And although I didn't exhibit the behaviour, when I've got this guy that I'm kind of looking up to that used to be the leader of an organised crime gang in South London in the 60s. And then I hit secondary school, high school, and I'm being told that I'm like my two badly behaved cousins. So therefore I've got my identity. I know how to act. I know what I needed to do. And when the final exclusion from the education system come about, you can imagine the only people I had to be able to make friends with during the day were those that were also in my same situation, or adults. And then you become, good or bad, you become part of something that is bigger than you. You have these shared, this is going to sound quite strange, but you have these shared values, however criminally minded, if you like, they are. And you're being praised, again, the reinforcement of, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, it's that attention you crave. That's what I got addicted to. And I found that I was getting involved in some very serious crimes at quite a young age.
Well, let's talk about that first crime that you committed at the age of 10, I think you said. Could you share, what was it? It couldn't have been.
It was something really silly. I mean, just where the toy shop was, it was in amongst a row of shops. And at the very first, there was a door into a flat that led upstairs, and next to it was a little window, and I smashed that window. And I didn't care that I got caught. I hung about and basically took it on the chin. And what followed, kind of, in a way, when I look back again with reflection, is probably why I have or had a mistrust of police and, I suppose, authority. I was taken to the police station, and I was shown this room, and I was told that this room, the light was off, this room was tiny, you wouldn't want to end up there. There was a pair of trainers outside, and then a few months later, when obviously the first caution never worked and I was back down there again, I was actually placed into this room, and it was huge. And the guy that had told me that initial lie, if you like, become my juvenile delinquent officer. So I had a guy that was meant to be working for me, or working with me, should I say, to keep me out of trouble. The one I had no respect for, because he'd already lied to me. So therefore, why am I going to believe anything he tells me in respect of this is what's going to happen again? It won't be the case, and it wasn't, obviously, as is evidenced by the rest of my life.
Okay, David, let me ask you about the first time that you were locked up for more than a short period of time, for a fairly significant period of time. What was the offense? Was it frightening, or were you accustomed to that kind of environment at this point? And how long were you in?
The first time I actually went away was in 1985, and I was placed into a system known as detention centres. And it was during a period of what was meant to be known as short, sharp, and I received a 4-month sentence. But prior to that, because of my behaviour, and I'd been on the run for, not a serious assault, but I used to belong to a youth club, and one of the workers, my girlfriend, had told me that I hurt her arm when he was trying to get her out. So I stupidly went back. I was drunk. I stupidly went back with a rounder's bat, like a mini baseball bat, and struck him a few times with that. And I had to go, obviously I was wanted for that, so I had to go on a run. And because I went on a run, when I was finally caught, I got put into the local authority. I was put into placed into the care of the local authority.
Had you not gone on the run, it might have been a lighter sentence.
Well, it was the maximum I could have got for the crimes. 4 months was the maximum you could have got at that age. I was only 15 at the time. So you mentioned about, was I already used to the environment? I was used to being. I was used to being away from the family unit anyway, but I was kind of used to an establishment regime through the lack of control that I had. So that wasn't too much of a shock, but it was HM Detention Centre, Blantyre House that I went to. And yeah, that was extremely scary. From the first moment I was stood in the exercise yard at the front of the building, well, it wasn't used as an exercise yard, but the delivery point, if you like, of prisoners. From that very first moment until around about week 3, when I actually got quite used to it. I was, if you like, had been broken and I was being built back up, but I was being built back up within a system, within a certain environment. And it was a certain environment that clearly didn't become a deterrent after that, because detention centre was quite difficult. It was run on the basis of army inductions. You have to learn to march first. We get every single morning, you're on parade in your individual work parties, and then you get marched off the parade ground until you get to your workplace, and that's when you get to stop being marched about. There's dormitories, kit inspections on Sundays. I mean, it really was, and it taught me quite a lot. I mean, it taught me quite a lot about survival. It gave me a different outlook. It gave me a different perspective, but it also got me talking to other people that were like-minded. And that age back then, a lot of us, I think, were very much on a pathway to big man's jail, what we'd like to call it. So my attitude got worse towards society, worse towards authority, but my attitude within prison become that somewhat of a prisoner. I accepted my environment for what it was, and it, as I say, it never became a deterrent.
Did you learn to kind of enjoy that environment to some degree?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if enjoy is the right word, because it does become difficult, but then it's like anything in life, isn't it? We go through a process, and I suppose losing your freedom is a process that one has to go through. You get angry, you deny. It's the same as grief. And then when you get to acceptance, you get to see things quite differently. And again, that's to a lot of things in life as well. Once you can accept that position, I think your thought process, your mindset then changes. And rather than see yourself as a victim, you start seeing yourself as someone that's a survivor, as someone that can survive. And I think that's this kind of journey that I went on after that.
Well, let's talk about after that. Like you said, I guess most people, or maybe not, I could be wrong about that. People who are on that path, perhaps not. When you get locked up for 4 months, I think you said, it seems like you would have come out of there saying, I'm never going back to a place like that again. I'm gonna turn it around. I'm gonna change myself. But it seems like even before you were out, you already knew that maybe wasn't true.
Yeah, and I could admit, and I don't mind admitting, because I'm hopefully quite open and honest about my life, that the day I got out, I was driving about in a stolen car with my mates. I mean, I really didn't care. It was a Renault Fuego. I can even describe the car, because it wasn't so much. Yeah, well, I suppose it was in them days. You can imagine we're 1985. my mates are kind of older than me in a way. I'm the youngest, but there I am, an ex-prisoner at 16. I spent my 16th birthday in detention centre as well, and my 18th in a youth custody centre. I don't really like birthdays.
Well, I want to know, was it just the identity? Was it just the lifestyle? Was it just the acceptance by that segment of society and the anger
Yeah.
that was growing within you? But I'm curious if there was another element. Perhaps you mentioned that you were drunk when you committed your first assault, or you got caught for that assault anyway. Was drink and drugs a big part of your life? And do you think that that is a big reason that you spent so much time behind bars?
Not so much drugs back then, but yeah, alcohol. I mean, there wasn't really the, I suppose, plethora of drugs available. Remember, it wasn't a quiet area that I was from, but then it wasn't kind of London either. So, and we're going back a number of years. So, really, it was just hash. That was the kind of drug of choice at that time, especially for our group, if you like, our gang. And nothing really any more serious than that. But alcohol, yeah, I mean, alcohol was something, again, because we're, myself and those that were my age were hanging about with people where alcohol was allowed, was part of their life. They did go to pubs, and we went to pubs with them, and we were getting served at young ages. I mean, a funny story, my sister, for my 18th, when I was locked up on my 18th in Dover youth custody, went to our local pub and paid my tab off for my birthday present. And the barman obviously said, "Oh, how old is he?" He said, "Oh, he's just turned 18. He went, 18? He said, "He's been drinking here 3 years." So it was kind of, yeah, that was the kind of lifestyle that you led. We were very much children living in an adult's world. So, of course, alcohol became part of that lifestyle of
Well,
being children.
frequent alcohol consumption leads to, reckless decision making, and you're prone to more violent behavior under those conditions.
Yeah, but again, the alcohol and drugs very much are pathways into that. But yeah, you've got to take it one step further back and look at the trauma that's involved. And that in itself is the actual gateway into those drugs, which then is obviously moves on to disruptive, challenging criminal behaviour.
I don't know if I think you're referring to the sexual abuse that you suffered as a child.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, there was the sexual abuse followed by the meningitis,
Right.
and although I could very much turn around and say, well, yeah, that's the reasons why. It wasn't, because I'm still responsible for my own actions.
Well, I'm curious though. Of course, I agree with you, but I'm curious. You've spent a lot of time behind bars. You've talked to a lot of prisoners, a lot of people who have committed many, many crimes. Have you found that something like sexual abuse is a common thread amongst?
Yeah, of course. But believe it or not, one of the biggest common threads, and I can quote the statistics that are actually from the government themselves, is that of all the children who are in custody right now, 88% of them have been excluded from school at some point. And that's the figure that in the adult prison estate sits around the 42% mark. Now, if you look at the adult prison estate as it is at the moment, which is approximately 80,000 people in prison, that's not including psychiatric hospitals. If you include those, you're probably looking at over 100,000 people in custody or in incarceration of some sort. But if we bring it back to the adults of 80,000, that's over 33,000 people in our prisons right now were let down by the education system because they were expelled from school at some point in their life. And I think for me,
Go ahead.
For me, that is really where the start of that school to prison pipeline begins. I'm not saying that the school system appears to be set up to not only punish children for their mistakes, but also to just provide if you like, the pathway into university. They're taught to pass exams and nothing else. And I think that's wrong, to be honest. And I think the proof of it can be evidenced by the numbers of those children in custody that have gone through a pupil referral unit, which is being someone that's excluded from school.
Well, this is
And
something
then,
that you've obviously thought a lot about. You've obviously discussed this a lot over the
yeah,
years. I'm curious, what do you think? Because most likely the majority of those kids were expelled due to behavior issues similar to you. I mean,
yeah.
do you think that you deserved to be expelled, or what other alternative path could have been presented?
There's something that there's actually something I can use, which I'm sure will be something that resonates with a lot of people. That in my school reports before being excluded from school and over the years, one of the biggest things I read, or one of the most overused quotes that appeared within my school reports was, "If only David had applied himself more." And I kind of look back now and think, hold on a minute. I was a child. Yes, I was challenging and disruptive, but that didn't mean to say I was bad. And what would have happened in my life had the school had applied themselves to me a little bit more, rather than just trying to get me to pass exams? And
What do you think they could have done differently, or how do you hope things are changing for kids today that they can stay in
hopefully
school even though they're
more
quite disruptive? Sorry?
no, it's fine to understand that. I mean, I saw something perfect the other day, which was a quote regarding children, and that if we actually knew the issues behind the bad behaviour, if we knew the reasons behind why some children are challenging the behaviour, rather than be angry, we'd cry, because they are very, very sad stories. And we kind of seems to have got to the point where we expect a hell of a lot of our children, and to expect our children that are not emotionally mature to know not just what questions to ask, but to actually ask for help in the first place. That is where the difficulties lie. And I think it's through awareness and letting children know that there are those that have been there, so they're not alone, they're not in isolation, and there are ways out, and there are ways of asking for help, but it has to be led by the adult. We can't keep reading, if only such and such had applied themselves. The school needs to be doing as much as they possibly can before, and the issue is, before concentrating on where they are in the league table. And passing the problem on to someone else, because that's all they're doing. They're not fixing the problem. They're just passing the problem on to someone else.
Has there been any change over the years, at least since, 30, 35 years since you were finally expelled from school? Has there been any change to the system to adapt to be able to?
There's less children in custody, but that doesn't stop the fact that 88% of them were excluded from school at some point. So I have to answer, no, things haven't improved over the years, not as much as what they should have done.
Have you heard a lot of people talking about this issue? I mean, honestly, it's not something I've really heard much about or even thought much about, but it makes absolute sense. I've never heard, politicians from anywhere really discussing issues like this.
No, because the problem is, Chris, and what's happened over the years is that the media and the government have, and rightly so, don't get me wrong, in some aspects, rightly so, they promote our criminal justice system through binoculars of fear. So the majority of society view our criminal justice system through fear. And the way it gets promoted, that I wouldn't disrespect you for thinking that all our prisons hold are murderers, rapists, paedophiles and terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they do. And yes, they are heinous crimes that those people commit. However, the system appears to be focusing on the reduction of reoffending. Those people that they promote the criminal justice system or use to promote the criminal justice system probably won't ever get out or are behind, the public are protected as soon as those people are behind doors. Yet those aren't the ones that are reoffending. The ones that are reoffending are the ones that are doing short sentences, the ones where, because we're focusing on the reduction of reoffending and we're not focusing on the individual and their reform and rehabilitation, it's where we're losing the plot, if you like, because we need to focus on the individuals more. We need to focus on influencing the individual to change, not the individual never to commit crime again.
Well, David, I imagine that over the years you were kind of in and out of detention centers and prisons for roughly 40 years, I think. You were probably locked up in a lot of different facilities and different locations. I'm curious where the toughest place you were ever incarcerated was, and why was it so tough?
Easy to say, it was Pentonville back in 2004. I was there for quite a few months. I was on remand there, and I was also there when I was first sentenced. And that really was, I'd been out the system for a number of years. Throughout the 90s, I'd gone in for a few days here and there for non-payment of criminal fines. I'd gone through a stage of kind of trying to find a legal way to earn money, finding a legal way to live, but I never dealt with me, so it never worked. I mean, I had about 14 jobs in a very short period of time. I was always walking out of jobs and then just going to get another one.
I'm curious, why do you think that was?
Because I still I didn't have a real character to be able to survive in society.
Does that mean showing up on time for work, so you were getting fired, or were you stealing from the places that you were working for? What was the real reason?
It was more along the lines of, you're not the boss of me. You might be paying my wages, mate, but you don't own me. And I think that attitude very much was because of the lack of control that I used to have, and a byproduct, if you like, of my comfort in prison. I mean, regardless of how comfortable I found myself sometimes in prison, don't get me wrong, I mean, I still had my moments. And something we can obviously come back to. It led to me trying to attempting my own life a few years ago, but a few years later. So prison can still affect you. It can still come up and bite you in the bum if you're not prepared.
Sure. Well, let's get back to that specific facility that you mentioned. You said that was the toughest place that you were ever in. Why was that place in particular so tough?
One of the main reasons why it was so tough was because it was the first Christmas period I'd spent in prison with my own children. And on Christmas Day, I literally spent minutes on the phone and just broke down. I couldn't do it, and I had to bang myself up for the rest of the Christmas period, or Christmas Day period, because I was so upset. And it, although it never changed me, it kind of it made me want to get through what I was facing. It kind of made me stronger in the environment I was in, but made me weaker as a person because of the fact it was my own children. I mean, my son was 2 years old. He turned 2 in October, and I hadn't been around for a number of months. And you know yourself that when children are first learning to talk, they kind of have a language that only you understand. So when he's talking to me on the phone, I'm having to ask their mother, who was my partner at the time,
kind of translate
what they were to translate, and that really hurt as well. So that was one of the reasons why. But the prison itself was very oppressive. I mean, it was a huge prison, dirty prison. It's better now, and it's getting better. But yeah, it was. We had no in-cell electricity, which isn't a complaint, because I mean, I was brought up imprisoned during a time when there was no in-cell electricity and it literally was lights out and you had a bucket. Now you kind of got a toilet in your cell and you get in-cell electricity and they have tellies and that. But so it was more a case of a comparison in prison rather than it was us complaining. So half the prison had electric and tellies and half didn't. And lo and behold, I was in the half that didn't.
Well, I'm curious because you said that it was a tough environment for you personally because it was the first time you were a father on the inside, and you were separated from your children, which made it very challenging for you. And then the conditions were a bit rough. Um, is it a violent environment in a place like that?
Um, yeah. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, prison are full of people that society are deeming that are too fit to walk our streets. So you've got some very violent people in prison. Whether some of those very violent ones should be in prison is another debate and one that I can't have because I've never been in that position. But the problem is that you've got such a mixture of complex needs, wants, psychological disorders, crimes. I mean, it really is, especially the local prisons. I mean, they're melting pots. They just, and unless you provide purposeful activity, unless you provide someone with something to do, it just makes sense that the only thing that's available is to bring stuff out in other ways. And that's where your violence comes from. That's where the riots come from, when there really is some deep deep underlying issues within that prison itself that more than likely the public don't get to hear about, other than the loads of prisoners that are kicking off again. And that message gets lost.
Were you fearful in that kind of environment, or did you kind of become?
Of course, you have to be. You have to be. You have that flight or fight response, and unfortunately, within the prison environment, you don't really have the flight response. It literally comes down to fight. I'm not saying you have to fight for your life, but in American prisons, quite clearly, it's a different environment indeed. But in our UK prison systems, it's not so much fighting for your life as fighting for your respect within the prison system itself.
Well, I'm curious about some of the other differences. You mentioned the differences between, prisons in the UK and the US. A lot of people know prison, luckily, mostly from television or movies, where it may or may not be a realistic presentation of what's going on. But there's a lot of things like docuseries that do, in fact, show you the realities of prison, especially in the US, where there's lots of gangs, and they're organized primarily along racial lines, at least in the US, whites, Hispanics, blacks, and so on. While you were incarcerated, were there gangs? Were there divisions? Were there groups? And along what lines? How did they form?
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, you've got a lot of gangs that, similar to the American prisons, that assimilate outside. So obviously, once they're inside, they assimilate once again. And yeah, you get different races, different religions. Black prisoners do tend to stick together more with black prisoners. Muslim prisoners, the same. So you do get, if you like, the what's known as protected characteristics of equality actually in the groups themselves. It is, but it's understandable. You do kind of, you do kind of sort of magnate magnate to your own. You don't really want, depending obviously on how long you're going to be spending in prison, it's a very lonely experience within such a busy environment if you're doing it literally by yourself. So you've got to imagine as well.
It's also a personal safety issue as well. You kind of have somebody looking out for you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, one of those aspects that you find where you do have that almost immediately is when you share a cell with someone. you share a cell with someone, you immediately become allies. It's kind of not an unwritten rule, but it's something you do. You protect your padmate, because especially in a two-man, you may be out of the cell at individual times, so therefore you're hoping that your padmate will protect your stuff while that door's unlocked, and vice versa. But then you also get to the physical side as well. I mean, again, you're talking about an environment where within seconds the atmosphere can change and it can just kick off. So you have to be, every time you're out of that door, you have to be alert. You don't have to be paranoid, and you don't have to think that anything's going to come on top of you just for the sake of it. Yet you do get those that prey on vulnerable people. You do get those that bully. So again, that is where the flight or fight response is removed. And if you're being bullied, if you're being put in that position, there is only one real option available to you, and you have to fight your way out. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes. It shouldn't be like that, but hello, it's reality, and you are just really, and the flight response is such a disparity between the fight response. I mean, the fight response, your bruises will heal if you get hurt, stab wounds will heal up if you don't get killed, obviously. But in respect of the flight response, you're going to have to go to staff. You're going to have to rat someone out. You're going to then have to go in protective custody. And once you go into protective custody, that protective custody will stay with you forever. So everyone will know that you spent time on protective custody. So whenever you go back to prison, you're going back to protective custody. So therefore, that fight doesn't become such a, it's more, oh, fair enough, that's the easiest option. As I say, bruises heal, cuts heal.
Were you ever seriously wounded in prison? Did you ever get stabbed or anything like that?
We've had fights in prison that have back in the 80s. We used to eat in our cells, and we used to get given these metal trays, and they 9 times out of 10 would have been damaged, and they were like razor blades. And I got caught with them a few times. Young offenders is completely different to adult prison. Well, it used to be. I mean, it seems to be the same thing these days, but it really did used to be different. It was just a battle of testosterone. It was, you would fight over a sock. You would fight over someone scoring a goal playing 5-side football. I mean, it's just a box of fireworks waiting to explode every single day in a young offenders.
Well, I want to ask you something, David. It's again, most people in the world, luckily, only know something like prison from movies or television or books or who knows what. But you have obviously a lot of experience on the inside. What are a couple of things that might surprise somebody who's obviously never been to prison about life in prison? Maybe something positive and something negative.
Well, one of the biggest things that would probably surprise people more than anything would be the community spirit amongst prisoners, and the way that prisoners, if you like, peer-led mentorship programs abound in our prisons. We have so many schemes that are facilitated by prisoners. We have an organisation called the St Giles Trust, which is peer advising about employment, accommodation, all of those, if you like, pathways back into crime once you're being released, if those issues aren't sorted. You have organisations, and I've worked for most of them, you have organisations like the Samaritans, who train prisoners to be listeners, and the listeners is a Samaritan. You listen and are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, to listen to the problems of other prisoners on a one-to-one basis. There's another organisation called Shannon Trust, who train mentors that are prisoners who can read to teach other prisoners who can't. And it was by becoming a mentor for Shannon Trust, which led on to me becoming a listener for the Samaritans, that really had a huge, profound effect on me. But it had a huge, profound effect on me within the prison environment first and foremost, which eventually, over the years, 10 years later, led to me being able to put it all together, and again, I suppose, learn from lessons, and learn from the experiences that have been going on around me over the years.
I want to amend my question. Let's skip the negative. I think there's enough negative things that people know about prison. We don't need to add one more. Why don't we talk about something positive? And I think you were kind of on the path right there. Prison is full of dangerous characters and, real criminals, but not everybody behind bars is a scary, dangerous person. You must have encountered your share of people that were inspirational people in one way or another. Can you recall one or two of those people?
Yeah, I can recall people that are still inspiring me now that are coming out of prison. There's a guy called LJ Flanders who he went to prison. He made his mistake, a previous sort of clean lifestyle, if you like. One mistake saw him end up in prison, and he was someone that liked to keep fit, and he was put in a 13-foot by 8-foot cell, which isn't very conducive to a gymnasium, and tried to find resources available for him to be able to carry on his training, but training within inside a prison cell and adapting what was around you in order to use as gym equipment. There wasn't anything available. So rather than complain about it, he created and designed his own system, and he's now a successful physical trainer. He's also a successful publisher. He has his own book out called Cell Workout, and he's got other prisoners involved in that. But not only that, he's now got his own brand, clothing sort of apparel, and that's being made by prisoners in a prison. So for me, it's just, that's one of, and I won't tire of promoting the guy, because for me, he is the epitome of a hashtag that I use, of hashtag what can be. He's gone into prison, he accepted it, he realized that this was an opportunity for him, rather than to be a victim, to be a survivor, but not just be a survivor, come out of it with a future. And that is what prison can be used for. It is a destination for people's rock bottom. And it doesn't have to be a series of offences that see you in prison. It can be a one-off mistake that a lot of people do make, and they find themselves in prison. And those are the...
Sorry, David, I want to fast forward a little bit, because you're kind of on track to discuss your own turnaround, your own story, and how it sounds like you're almost speaking about yourself and your own story in a way. So I want to move forward a little bit to, I think it was 2015. You were a free man at the time, but you weren't doing so well. You found yourself homeless. You were using drugs quite heavily. You were just generally in very poor condition. I think you said you were sleeping in the doorway of a church even.
Yeah.
How were you able to turn your life around to what it is today from that very low point?
Well, you just say it there, Chris. How much lower could it have got? I was contemplating suicide. And there was a situation that happened that kind of made me realise that the doorway that I was sleeping in, I was advised by the local homeless agency to sleep there, because once they had seen me on 3 consecutive nights sleeping there, they could then confirm that I was indeed homeless. And that was when I decided to have gone to the local council for help, because my criminal record, there's a lot of violence, and there's a lot of violence against authority on my record. I therefore couldn't be housed temporarily, so I had to stay homeless until they investigated my claim. They accepted me under the Homeless Legislation Act, but as I say, they had their hands tied as to what they could do for me.
You mean to maybe
And
take you into a shelter or something?
well, exactly. I mean, I was high risk of violence,
Sure.
so they obviously have to protect their other residents. Whether or not I would have committed violence is neither here nor there.
Yeah.
My past put me within a pigeonhole on something known as offender group rating. So, because of my history, because of my past, because of my previous criminality, I was given a score based on other people's lives over the years.
Other
That
people's
I would, in
lives.
fact, it was, that's where they get their percentages from.
Uh-huh.
So again, they don't focus on individuals. It's like, right, okay, you're this age, you've got this many previous convictions, you're this percentage to come back to prison. And it kind of, in a way, it kind of doesn't fill you with hope. And it's like, well, what's the point? Well, if that's my percentage of coming back to prison, what is the point? And then I realised that at that stage, it was 62% returned to prison in the first 12 months. And then I thought, hold on a minute, 38% don't. Why am I not hearing about the 38% that don't? Because once again, when it comes to the narrative, and the government are focusing with Her Majesty's prisons are focusing on the reduction of reoffending, that 62% figure is the one that they want to promote, not the 38% figure. Because the 38% figure shows that prison can and does work. And what it really comes down to is the attitude of the individual, along with what's available to that individual coming out of prison. Now, we can influence the attitude of the prisoner. We can influence the attitude in respect of early intervention before someone becomes a prisoner. What we can't do, it seems, is while the government are on this bandwagon of actually hammering the criminal justice system every time they're embarrassed in other areas or other departments of their under their control. We seem to just want to appease the voters, and it seems that the criminal justice system is always the target of whatever government's in power.
Sure, of course. And you're obviously very passionate about this subject,
Yeah.
and we will get into that a little bit more. But I want to bring it back to your story just for a moment, David. So as you said, prison can be a tool for change, and it seems like you became aware of that at some point. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you did return to prison one more time, and that is kind of where you began to turn your own life around. Is that correct?
Whether or not it was, you've got to understand the situation and the circumstances to make a decision on whether or not it was irrational or rational. However, what I'd like to think is whether or not it was or it wasn't, what's going on now is proof that it worked. But I saw, once that had happened to me with the homeless agency and with the council, I thought, immediately, my thought was, what's the point? There really is no point. And then it was, I found myself involved with a guy that was dealing drugs and dealing heavy drugs. He basically was paying me in drugs to help him. And it was during a conversation one night with him and someone else that it hit me. The if you like, the epiphany hit me of, what am I doing out here like this? This isn't me. And I made a decision that I needed to go back to the environment in which I felt the most comfortablest, the environment in which I had quite a high level of respect because of the work that I did whilst in prison. Although I'm doing this now out here, this is no different to who I was in prison from 2005. I've always had this kind of helping others using my experiences, but it was in prison that I was doing that.
It does seem like kind of an odd thought, though, to be honest, and I'm sure you've heard this before. I want to turn my life around. I need to get back
Was
into
it?
prison.
Only because of the environment. I mean, the decision I took to take one step back in order to move myself forward wasn't the wrong decision at all. The only thing that's probably in question is the environment I chose. However, that environment I chose in my life, not anyone else's life, was my comfort zone. And it was the area that I knew that, um, removing all temptations, if you like, although there's another story there, but I could utilize all of my experience in changing me. I could utilize those resources that I knew were available to me in changing me. But then, in order to create for myself a better future and the future that I'm now in, and it's like, sadly, he died recently, Sir Ken Robinson, who's very much an advocate of changes in education. He wants a transformation, not a reformation. He talked about finding your element, and this is where I am now, is finding my element based on all of that.
Well, so you did find yourself back in prison again, correct?
Yeah,
What was the
that's correct.
process? What was the process of getting to, being back in prison again to where you are now? What were those steps along the way, or some of the key points?
Well, obviously, first and foremost, I had to commit a crime, but I had to commit a crime that would have given me long enough. I mean, again, whether or not my mind was rational or irrational, you've got to imagine I was quite high on drugs.
Yeah.
I've been smoking heroin and crack all night. Cannabis was involved, and certain tablets were involved as well. So I pretty much was a mix, but it kind of also gave me clarity as well in one aspect. And so I began to piece together what it was I needed to do. And a friend of mine, one of the guys that was there became ill. We had no money. So the goal was to get money. Okay, how do I get money? Well, I'm not going to get a bank loan. No one's going to give us money. The amount of money you need isn't huge. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. So then I decided that an armed robbery on a shop would be the answer to get him the money. But I also then created a plan in my head that enabled me to commit the crime, be caught for it, but in a way that would give me at least a little bit of benefit of the doubt whether or not I committed that crime. And that gave me a little bit more of an option when I got into court. So I committed the crime. I'm not proud of it. I've mentioned once that I saw it as a means to an end, and it was for me. So therefore, I didn't have a victim. Yes, I created a victim by robbing the shopkeeper, but in my mind, I didn't create a victim, because for me, in my life and my world and my justification, they didn't justify the means, didn't justify the ends. However, because it wasn't right to have committed an offence that involved a victim. And I am sorry to the victim that it happened. But as I say, I mean, I wasn't rational at that time.
Yeah.
So I kind of had blinkers on myself as to what my goal was.
You're clearly a different person now, and what you're doing
Yeah,
now.
100%.
You're on the straight and narrow. You're doing great things with your life. Obviously, I don't think I'd recommend doing that, but it seems to have worked out. As crazy as a plan as it was, it seemed to have worked out for you. So you did wind up back in prison. And I think you got involved with was it the Open University? Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. The problem I had was I've got all of this experience through lived experience, if you like. And I'd learned how to do things a prison way. I had a number of role models, people that I used to look up to, that in a way were secret mentors. They didn't know that they were my mentors. It was people over a number of years. One of those was a guy called Mark Leach, who made so many changes for prisoners over the years. I had so much respect for the guy. Unfortunately, I didn't have his skills. So I was still doing things for the right reasons, but the wrong way. I would argue rather than debate. I would write letters, but I would write letters of complaint rather than provide letters that were highlighting an issue and provided solutions. So that is something that I needed to learn, and something that I saw that these other guys that had gone through the system had done themselves. They learned not only how to do it, but they learned the language in which to do it in as well, because the criminal justice system appears to have its own language. So I thought, to be heard, I need to be understood first and foremost. So the idea then was, right, okay, what does the degree path, going down the degree path, teach you? It teaches you how to structure an argument. It teaches you how to introduce something, the evidence and the reasons why you're introducing it, and it obviously gives you the conclusion as well to what your point is. So that screamed volumes at me. So I as you know, I was educated out of the education system, and my education come from the prison system. I already had a number of qualifications from previous sentences, but as I said before, it wasn't, learning was something I loved. I mean, I used to do my own research from 10 years old. Learning was something I never, ever, ever fell out of love with. Learning's quite addictive. I mean, more addictive than some drugs, learning. It was the education system that I had issues with. It was my own traumas that I hadn't dealt with, along with the way that I felt I've been treated and compared to. I looked at, plus trying to find an identity. So I began with funding from the Prisoners Education Trust to do an access module, which I'm not sure if people are aware, it's a kind of an introductory level to what it is that you'll be studying within a degree module. And the feedback that I was getting from that really, if you like, proved the teachers right. It was like, wow, look what happens when David does apply himself. And in a way was what gave me the fire to think, or which led to me thinking, well, hold on a minute, what if the school system had applied themselves to me, and gave me the fire in my belly to really look at education in respect of a whole rather than just within prison, because it was through my own education that enabled me to discover, not just discover, but also unlock that talent, or this talent I have inside me, to campaign for prison reform.
Yes, indeed. Well, we'll get to that in just a second. I'm curious though, if you know, you're reaching out to young people in your talks, in your writing, you're trying to affect change in people who might be on a path similar to you. If in fact there is somebody watching this right now, listening to this right now, who knows, from inside a prison cell or just kind of stuck in that bad way, is there something that you think that you could say to them that might be able to make a change? Of course, it would be different on a case-by-case basis, but overall, is there some kind of advice that you could give somebody like that?
Yeah, stop trying to protect an image that doesn't exist, is one. And another piece of advice I'll take from somebody else, actually, a guy called Terry Ellis, who's kind of on a similar vein along prison reform, is that there's no real code. One of the best ways to find out who your friends are is to get yourself a prison sentence. It's fake. It doesn't exist. It's a false economy. These gangs that you may be a part of, that love and acceptance will only last as long as you can provide what it is that you do. There's no, it's a lie. It's a fallacy. It's a reality that you, as an individual, because of your need, if you like, for that attention, for your need for love, for your need for hiding perhaps trauma, rather than face the trauma you've had, you hide it through being challenging and disruptive. And then once you become challenging and disruptive, you find these people that are also challenging and disruptive and validate what it is that you're doing. And as you know yourself, what we believe becomes thought, or what we think becomes beliefs. Beliefs in no time at all start becoming actions, and actions become habits. And habits are very, very difficult to break. And that's why I'm so strong with my message that early intervention. I saw a word the other day, pre-rehabilitation, pre-habilitation, not rehabilitation. And it's about that being proactive. It's about getting kids before they go down that path. And I think it's by utilising lived experience that people have who have gone through the system. By, if you like, you can. It's got what made you change. Why did so? It's kind of from that you can break down exactly what it is that children that are on the path need to hear, and that you are not alone, and that there are people that really do care. I mean, your family, for one. I know it might not feel like it, but your family do really have your best interests at heart, more so than any street gang will. And as I say, with the advice from Terry Ellis, don't try and protect something that doesn't exist, which is this fake code of honour. There is no code of honour amongst thieves. People will drop you like a brick as soon as you end up behind that door. It's as simple as that. And although I found prison comfortable, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's a horrible place. It's a nasty place. It was just unfortunate that it become an environment in which I become used to. So don't become me. Don't become me.
Well, become you that you are today, not the old you. Well, let's talk about that for a second, the new you, if you will. It's a remarkable thing that you were able to turn your life around. At what age were you released from prison last?
I was released in 2017. I was 48.
48. It's remarkable that I think a lot of people would just kind of be stuck in their ways at that point. So it's an amazing thing that you've been able to turn your life around and become a spokesman for such good, for making
It's funny
change.
You say that, Chris, because if we go back to the crime I committed that got me back to prison, in my mind, I was in a win-win situation because there was a very good possibility that I would have ended up with a life sentence had things had gone wrong. Now, for me, because of the way and what it is that I wanted to do, I could still work towards prison reform in prison. I don't have to be out here to work towards prison reform. Another reason why I went back was because I wanted to rebuild relationships with those that I wanted to build relationships with, rebuild relationships with. I could still do that from prison. I was comfortable in prison. So had I had gotten a life sentence, it kind of was a win-win situation. I either changed my life around for the better and forever by being released, by doing what I did and getting released, or I still make my life fine with no external issues whilst doing exactly what it was that I wanted to do, but in a different environment, the environment of prison. So fortunately, it didn't work out that way. And who knows
I think part of, David, I think part of what is so impressive is that you were able to break the cycle for the most part, you know. You were able to kick drugs. You were able to get on a positive path with your life. Yes, you still could have done some of those things in prison. But what's so remarkable is that at that age, when it's harder to break habits and change who you are fundamentally, you were able to break that cycle. That's what I'm so impressed by, and a lot of other things about you as well. But I want to ask you, you know, this might be kind of an awkward question. Do you fear that you know, you've been out of prison for three years and you've been doing great things. You did a fantastic TED Talk. You're blogging and writing and doing great things. Is there a part of your mind that worries that you could still take a misstep, even to this day, and possibly wind up back there?
I'm going to be totally 100% honest with you, Chris. Since I've been out, it hasn't been 100% plain sailing. I haven't committed crime, but I've been involved in situations. I've relapsed with drugs. I'd be a liar if I said I hadn't over the period I've been out. And one of those was a serious drug. One of those was crack that I had relapsed on. And in a way, I'm glad it happened because I didn't get anything from it. I was eager to do it again. But that was more my circumstance. I felt trapped. I come out with this intention of changing my life and helping to change others by using my experiences. And here I was, kind of 16, 17 months down the line of being released, and I'm still in supported accommodation. I was still in the system. And I kind of, I suppose, wanted an escape from reality. And in a way, I weighed up my options, and alcohol was a no-no because I know that alcohol is a drug that, let's be honest, if alcohol was invented today, they'd ban it. Let's be honest. It was a no-no area for me because you can't really
but somehow
control.
Crack was okay.
Yeah, well, crack really. This is going to sound proper strange, but crack really is only a problem if when it becomes a problem. When it's like that for me, which become a one-off. And as I say, I mean, it got to the point where I started weighing up, rather than should I do something, shouldn't I? It was which one should I do? Mm-hmm. And then crack become my option. It wasn't an immediate decision. It wasn't something I smoked straight away, but it was something I suppose that come to. It was something every now and again. Go on, have a day off, have a day off, have a day off, have a day off. It was constant. But then that's why it's known as recovery. That's why it's known as the cycle of change, because once you go down that road, you can't ever get off of it. It's just that you're in different parts of your life. And at the moment, and for a very, very long time, I have been in the maintenance stage. I'm getting on with my life. I'm happy. But I'm doing more things as well. Once the devil makes the devil makes work for idle hands. And that's where I was. I was doing little bits and pieces, but I wasn't doing a lot. And I felt that was based on where I was. I felt trapped. I felt as if I've got all this energy and I can't do nothing with it. And yeah, I relapsed. However, as soon as I relapsed, a friend of mine, about an hour later, a friend of mine turned up. I thought, great, that's ruined the buzz. But then there was no buzz. It was like, what a waste of time and what a waste of money. And I haven't relapsed since.
That's fantastic. And I hope you stay on that path. But, well,
I will do.
Just because you reform your life doesn't mean you turn into an angel overnight. It's a long process. It's a long road ahead. I want to talk about the work that you're doing now, David. So for people who aren't aware of what you're doing with criminal justice reform and your writing, how would you describe that?
Basically what we've been talking about, Chris. I'm hopefully using my experiences in the right way, in the right language, done in a professional way, but from a basis of someone that accepted my lot. I deserved every second of every day of every sentence that I ever got. I believe that I was dealt with just and fairly each time. I don't come of it from a position of anger. So, and I also very much understand the importance of those that work within our prisons and the supported agencies. So if you like, I can combine everything together. And I'm able to bridge the gaps, if you like, that exist between society and prison, that exist between staff and prisoners, and that exists between management and staff, and that exists between those in charge and those that are overseeing it. And I'm trying to, I suppose, look, we need to work together. I was unfortunate as a listener to have gone to 2 inquests into 2 prisoners that successfully took their own lives. Sorry to say successfully, but I can't think of. The word commit makes it sound wrong, committed suicide. I mean, that does sound wrong. It's as if they've done something wrong, and in their eyes, they haven't. So they successfully took their own lives. And one thing I'd noticed as I was giving evidence was no one was interested in what went wrong. They were more interested in that it wasn't down to them. And I thought that was wrong. And if we start looking...
Do you mean that they weren't to blame in any way?
Yeah, it wasn't their fault. And I'm like, well, hold on a minute. This isn't about blame. This is about what went wrong within this process that led to this guy successfully taking his own life, who our mission statement says we have a duty of care to. Yes, prisons are there to protect the public, but they also have a duty of care to those that they hold. And surely one of the most fundamental things that a prison system should be held accountable for is making sure that that person is alive and sees out their sentence alive. And unfortunately, the lessons of previous suicides and attempts on suicides and the self-harm issues, the lessons aren't being learned, because it's kind of got to the point where we want a collective responsibility, but within this collective responsibility, there's no one to take responsibility for. There has to be a door where the buck stops so that we can then move forward. And it's like, right, okay, this is wrong. We shouldn't be looking at blaming each other. We should be looking at ways at how we can incorporate each department that works within these prisons to stop suicides, prevent suicides, and prevent inquests. There's a lot that goes on where information is protected rather than shared. And that's not right. That's not right. Especially if we're working towards the best interest, yes, of the public, but let's remember that the punishment is prison. What we do with them people in prison surely comes down to humanity, and the understanding that a lot of people in prison are going to be released. So surely we want these people released alive, because they're our loved ones. Don't forget, they're still mothers, fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers, sons and daughters. They're human beings. They're people too, that may have made one mistake. That mistake shouldn't be held against them, and it shouldn't cost them their life. And that they come out with the right skills and the right frame of mind and mindset to become a successful member of society. Surely that is something that we can all agree with and all work towards.
Absolutely. And David, it's obviously, there are so many things that need to change all the way down the line. It's not just a single point. And, you're obviously very passionate about all of these issues, and it's fantastic. And the work that you're doing, hopefully it's making a dent in these huge issues. Prior to the situation that we're in now, and I'm referring to the COVID-19 pandemic, quarantine that a lot of people are in around the world, you were traveling quite a bit. This is something that we spoke about earlier. You were out doing public speaking and, meeting people face to face, obviously, and doing different kinds of presentations. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected you personally, and how has it affected the work that you're doing?
In a way, it's improved things for me, because Zoom, Microsoft Teams, there are other platforms available, I suppose. They have enabled me to widen the audience, expand my network overnight, because you've either had to accept digital technology or be left in the past. And we're talking the past of a few months ago. I mean, where we are in respect of Zoom and Microsoft Teams from 6 months ago is just incredible. I mean, everyone has gone to digital technology to build their business, carry on their business, adapt to the changes and find new ways of working. But not only that, what it's also done is it's forced our prison system and our overseers of the prisons to embrace digital technology, and because there's been no other way, and in-cell technology and in-cell activities, which is where a lot of people, especially through lockdown, spend a lot of their time. And it's given people like myself the ability to get involved in those projects. And if you like, speak to the guys directly in their cells. They're a captive audience. And through digital technology, my hope, and I pray that once we come out of this situation, that there's been some research done on the back of digital technology in prisons, and it's been fantastic research. I mean, the results have been fantastic. So I'm hoping that the prison system continues to embrace it, because we need as many forms, blended learning. We need to find as many ways of influencing, if you like, change within prisoners, but we also need to influence the prison system in providing the right activities and then the right opportunities, because otherwise it becomes false hope. There's no point getting someone to change in prison. There's no point providing someone with opportunities and qualifications in prison if when they come out, there's no second chance. We've got a society turning their back.
So embracing digital technology could be the silver lining to at least the COVID-19 pandemic for a lot of us, and even prisoners as well. David, your story is both heartbreaking but also very inspiring. I appreciate your courage for being able to share your story so openly and so honestly. Hopefully there are some people watching and listening to this that may be on a similar path that you were, and they might take pause and listen to your words. Hopefully this conversation might be able to impact even one person's life. David, thank you so much for joining me today on Meet My Inspiration.
Actually, it's been my absolute pleasure, and thank you. And can I just say thank you, not just to yourself, Chris, but also people like you that are doing podcasts around the world that enable a different walk of society to have a voice. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that, David.
You're welcome.
My thanks to David for sharing his story with us. Certainly one key point that can be taken from his story is that it's never too late to change yourself for the better. If he can break the cycle of a life of crime, imprisonment, and drug abuse, you can certainly make the change that you want in your life, however big or small it may be. If you'd like to connect with David or read his recent articles on prison reform and other related topics, check out his blog at journeyofareformedman.net. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Meet My Inspiration, and I hope we've been able to inspire you too, even if just a little. Sometimes that's all it takes to make great things happen. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like broadcasting to the world everything you do online. Here's how to protect yourself and get 3 months for free. Did you know that your internet service provider knows every single website you visit? And what's worse is they can sell this information to ad companies and tech giants who will use your data to target you. ExpressVPN creates a secure encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet so that your online activity can't be seen by anyone. ExpressVPN works on all devices, phones, laptops, even routers, so that everyone who shares your Wi-Fi is protected too. And the best part is using ExpressVPN is super easy. Just fire up the app, click one button, and you're protected. ExpressVPN is the world's #1 rated VPN by TechRadar, Wired, The Verge, and countless others. So if you believe your online activity is your business, secure yourself by visiting expressvpn.com/MMI, and you can get an extra 3 months for free. That's expressvpn.com/MMI.